Tonight, turmoil in Russia.
We all should be prepared for the worst.
A new mayor for Ferguson. And April Fools in the era of fake news. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted along party lines to approve the nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. The nomination now heads to the Senate floor, where Chris Coons of Delaware today gave Senate Democrats the 41 votes they need to filibuster. Senate Republicans are expected to vote later this week to change Senate precedent, so Gorsuch can be sent to the bench by simple majority.
The majority leader has promised to use whatever tactic is necessary to get his way, to make sure that Donald Trump's nominee is confirmed, even if that means forever damaging the United States Senate.
Jared Kushner, son-in-law and senior advisor to President Trump, arrived in Iraq today with General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The White House says that Kushner, who has no previous diplomatic or government experience, was traveling on behalf of the president to meet with Iraqi leaders, senior U.S. advisors, and U.S. field forces as they fight to retake Mosul from ISIS. The campaign of vanquished Ecuadorian presidential candidate Guillermo Lasso says it will publish proof that vote tallies were doctored in favor of left-wing socialist Lenin Moreno, a paraplegic former vice president who secured victory. Lasso tweeted photos allegedly showing votes for his campaign that were changed by election officials, calling on supporters to protest in the streets for a recount. Heavy flooding has killed more than 200 people in Colombia and left hundreds more injured. The search continues for those who are missing as mourners begin to bury the dead. President Juan Manuel Santos declared a state of emergency, citing climate change as the cause of the mudslide. Medicaid expansion is officially dead in Kansas after state lawmakers failed to override the governor's veto of a bill that would have given coverage to 150,000 low-income residents. Kansas was one of 19 states that didn't expand Medicaid in 2016, citing high budget costs. Earlier today, a bomb detonated in a busy St. Petersburg subway station, killing at least 10 people and injuring more than 50. A second improvised device was found and safely disarmed. The blast is being treated as an act of terrorism. President Putin announced an investigation.
Правоохранительные органы и специальные службы работают, сделают все для того, чтобы выявить причины случившегося.
But the attack came as the Russian government is struggling to contain another crisis. This one linked to a video purportedly connecting Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev to a series of lavish estates and accusing him of systematic corruption. Despite attempts to censor it, the video went viral in Russia. Last week, tens of thousands of people surged into the streets of major Russian cities to demand the Prime Minister's ouster, the largest demonstrations the country has seen in half a decade. Authorities addressed the crisis immediately by arresting almost 1,000 people. The protests have been suppressed, but opposition supporters say they're determined to continue their campaign as soon as their leaders get out of prison. Josh Hirsch has more.
That's my husband. Woo-hoo.
Sergei Gorkaev was picked up last week, one of nearly 1,000 people who were detained during a day of mass anti-corruption protests. This weekend, he was reunited with his wife, after a week in detention. But he wasn't on the streets. At the time of his arrest, he was volunteering for a group of activists who were live-streaming the protests. That group, which is known as the Anti-Corruption Foundation, is run by opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Everyone who was in the office that day was arrested, and several are still in jail. Today, Gorkaev went back to the raided office of the foundation, whose video of Prime Minister Medvedev and work to uncover official graft helped inspire the demonstration.
But in general, everything remains the same as it was the day we left.
Yeah, but the police were clearly here.
Yeah.
And they took some computers, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure.
On the day of the protests, which happened in cities across the country, Official news channels had nothing to say about them. But the ACF live stream ran throughout the day. 10 hours of constant coverage, seen at its peak by 150,000 people. When the police raided the office, they were trying to shut it down. Roman Rubinov, the director of the ACF, says the group was ready for that.
We were expecting it. We have a reserve studio for this kind of thing, and during arrest, we switched to the reserve studio. So we basically, it was not our major scenario for this evening, but we were prepared for this.
He's also the deputy campaign manager for Alexei Navalny's long-shot 2018 presidential run.
It was huge protest all over Russia, and we were surprised.
So it suggests that the level of frustration right now is at a very high point.
It's a very high point. Yeah. People saw evidence. Evidence was like loud and clear. There is corruption, and government need to answer about it. Something.
Will there be more videos, do you think?
Sure. We have long lists actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can look forward to more of these.
Yeah, for sure. Because they give a lot of material for us.
After a week in special detention, Gorkayev says he has a better sense of what's to come.
This is for the first time I experienced some kind of things like this. I have heard about it, I read about it in the newspaper, but you never know. You always think that it's not going to happen to you, and now you are in the same situation.
To some extent, you could expect it because you guys are doing something that's very threatening to Putin and his government.
You're absolutely right, but I expected it could happen a bit later.
Right.
But it happened too fast.
Right. I mean, there's an election. It's not until next year, so that's a lot of time. Does it make you think about whether you want to stay involved through all that time?
And I hope everything is going to be all right, but I think we all should be prepared for the worst.
Yeah.
President Trump met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi today.
I just want to say to you, Mr. President, that you have a great friend and ally in the United States and in me.
Wednesday, he'll meet with the King of Jordan, followed by Chinese President Xi Jinping on Thursday and Friday. Shauna Thomas reports on the one thing that won't be on the public agenda with any of them.
Even if President Trump hadn't warmly welcomed el-Sisi today, the mere fact of the Egyptian president's visit would be warm enough. The Obama administration wouldn't let el-Sisi come to the White House, objecting to his brutal 2013 crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood and all forms of political Islam. Trump's White House said to expect the issue of human rights to be handled, quote, in a private, more discreet way than it had in the past. It's a change in policy, but also a promise kept.
It is the right of all nations to put their own interests first. We do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone.
Plenty of people think there are consequences for America surrendering its leading public role in demanding human rights. It's a tradition observed strongly by presidents on the left.
We will speak up on behalf of human rights because we believe they are the birthright of every human being.
And on the right.
There is no justice without freedom, and there can be no human rights without human liberty.
But like any negotiation, having one less thing you feel strongly about makes the horse trading easier. And there's a lot Trump wants from el-Sisi, King Abdullah, and Xi Jinping. From Egypt, further military and counterterrorism cooperation. Jordan, a continued commitment to helping with Syrian refugees and fighting ISIS. In China, we want a lot from China, but stepping up when it comes to countering North Korea is at the top of the list. Today, a bipartisan group of senators tried to send a bit of a counter message by introducing a resolution that acknowledges the role Egypt plays in the Middle East, while also urging the country to make progress on human rights. But at least one congressional Republican sees the wisdom in the Trump administration's approach to foreign policy in the early days of this presidency. Here's what he said, quote, "When you've got a country that you gotta develop a good relationship with, you probably don't walk in and lead by punching them in the nuts."
On Tuesday, the residents of Ferguson, Missouri will vote in the first mayoral election since the 2014 death of Michael Brown. Caroline Motoresi-Tehrani has more.
I want to just remind you guys to get out tomorrow Get out to vote.
Longtime Ferguson resident and current mayor James Knowles is the last man standing. After Mike Brown's death, Ferguson's police chief, city attorney, municipal judge and city manager, all of them white, resigned.
We needed to have somebody that was there that could keep the ship going forward.
And that's how you saw your role?
And that's the role that I had to be. I had to be there so that we didn't have a mass exodus from our police department. I had to be there so that our staff knew that on Friday they were going to get paid. We had to know, our businesses needed to know that they had somebody that they could call.
Even after Brown's death, Ferguson remains a majority black city with a predominantly white police force. Knowles' challenger is Ella Jones, a former Mary Kay cosmetic saleswoman and the first black woman to serve on the city council. She says her city needs a fresh start.
Well, the mayor of Ferguson is the symbol of Ferguson. Right now, our reputation is tarnished.
Do you think that a fresh start for Ferguson means a black mayor?
No, it does not mean a black mayor. It means a mayor who cares about everyone, a mayor who is inclusive but not exclusive.
Ferguson is ground zero for Black Lives Matter. And when I talked to people here, they told me the city is still pretty divided along racial lines, but they were reluctant to talk to us on camera. But what can a mayor here in Ferguson actually accomplish? The job pays around $4,200 a year, and the city manager is in control of everything from appointing judges to supervising the police department. Why would you want to be mayor of Ferguson?
Look, like I said, I've lived here for 37 years. The one thing that the council does do, and the mayor is the head of the council, is we hold the purse strings to everything that goes on in the city.
Ferguson has racked up millions of dollars in debts, revamping its municipal court, paying overtime to police during the protests and riots, and is still under a DOJ consent decree. All in all, that amounted to over $4 million. The city continues to struggle to hire new police because they simply can't pay what surrounding communities can. Many businesses that were hit in Ferguson never fully recovered. And for there to be some change in Ferguson, it's going to require voters to take to the polls. And voter turnout here has been traditionally very low.
Last week, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a case that could overturn 7 convictions in one of the most infamous murders in Washington, D.C. history. At issue is whether prosecutors withheld evidence that could have acquitted the defendants, evidence they may have been legally required to disclose.
In October 1984, a 48-year-old mother of 6 named Catherine Fuller was found dead in an alley. She'd been beaten to death and sodomized with a pipe. There was no physical evidence linking anyone to the crime scene, but prosecutors used witness statements to convict 8 young men of first-degree murder. What prosecutors didn't disclose was that they'd also identified a separate suspect. Before a trial, prosecutors have to share any evidence that could acquit the defendant, even if the defendant doesn't ask for it. It's called Brady disclosure, after a 1963 Supreme Court case, Brady v. Maryland. There's no standard to determine which evidence qualifies, so prosecutors decide on their own. A defendant can challenge his conviction on Brady grounds if he can prove 3 things: that evidence was suppressed, that it's favorable to him, and that it could have affected the outcome of the trial. That's what the Supreme Court is now considering in the Fuller case. Here's the theory that prosecutors presented at the original trial. A gang of more than 10 people were hanging out in a park on the day of the murder. They spotted Fuller and decided to rob her. They forced her into the alley where they beat her, dragged her into a garage, and sodomized her. Here's the evidence prosecutors suppressed. The person who found Fuller's body saw 2 men in the alley. They both fled when the police arrived. The witness noticed one of the men hiding an object under his coat and identified him as someone named James McMillan.
Why was his name not given to the defense?
The policy of the Department of Justice was that if it is not required to disclose information, we will not provide it.
One federal judge recently called Brady violations an epidemic. Out of the 762 murder exonerations since 1989, 50% were Brady violations. James McMillan went on to commit 2 nearly identical attacks on women and is now serving life without parole. One of the 8 men convicted for the Fuller murder was let out on good behavior. Another died in prison. The other 6 have been incarcerated for the past 32 years.
We don't know how the trial would have shaped up and how the jury would have reacted if the defendants had put on this alternative theory. You can say, well, I probably would have failed, but the test is only, could a jury believe this scenario?
David O'Reilly is an artist known for bizarre animated ephemera, a cult episode of the cartoon Adventure Time. A foul-mouthed 3D simulation in Her.
Come on, follow me, pussy!
And now he's created a video game that allows players to become anything and everything in our interconnected universe. It's called, appropriately, Everything.
So how do you explain the game?
I don't explain it.
You don't explain it?
No, I don't think it's my job to explain it at all. I think I can describe it.
So how do you describe it?
That's a hard one too, but I could try.
In Everything, the player can be anything. If you see a tree, you can become it. If you see a rock, you can be that, or an atom of nitrogen, or a galaxy. You play the game by being.
Mostly it's bringing you back to a version of Earth, and it's showing, hopefully, Earth to be the most sort of interesting planet, and out of all of Earth, that creatures are the most interesting thing, and we're the most interesting creature that could exist. And then at the same time, you're completely insignificant, or let's say as significant as everything else in the world.
Everything also has a narrator.
When you came into this world, there gradually arose into being the sensation of I. And it stays there a while, it goes through a development, and then it drops off.
The voice of Alan Watts, a famous philosopher who died in 1973, talks to players at various points in the game.
So we see one way of looking at things, mainly that the organism is very frail against the environment. It lasts a long time, the environment, but the organism only lasts a short time.
So we started making this game, and I would just listen to him just put it on.
Oh, while you were working on the game?
While I was working on it. And then there was this strange reflection between like what he was saying and what we were making.
Is it odd at all that you're using this guy who passed away 40 years ago to narrate your game?
I think anybody who's spent time listening to Alan Watts, you have this deep respect for him. You know, I really worked hard to do justice to, I hope to do justice to what his material is.
Sometimes it kind of feels like the game is almost a vehicle for Alan Watts' philosophy.
Yes. Yeah. It's the biggest use of Alan Watts' material that's ever existed. I think that's cool. Like, he was a philosopher, was just incredibly wise. And you hear that in the game.
What is, in other words, conflict at one level of magnification is harmony at a higher level.
And sometimes it's really uncanny. He talks about everything a lot, which is to say, not the game, but the totality of existence, or like, you know, the universe, let's say, or nature.
Everything might look like a relaxing game, but it actually goes to some pretty dark places.
Being is simply a sudden experience which was nothing before it started and will be nothing after it's over.
It takes the game from feeling like a weird acid trip into something that's a lot deeper and just real.
What do you want players to get out of this game?
It is trying to get at this impossible thing, which is an objective perspective. If you do want to argue or make a point, the best place to do that from is from understanding the other's point of view, and maybe even understanding it better than they do.
David wants players to feel like they're moving through their own documentary about the nature of existence. But what you get out of that documentary depends on how you play it.
To quote Alan Watts in a more concise way, is that difference and the interplay of difference is the way through which unity is observed. So what you are is changing all of the time, but what it's doing is always the same.
Big changes are happening at Twitter. On Friday, the company announced they were getting rid of the Twitter egg, the default profile photo that had become associated with anonymous harassment and trolling. So Twitter replaced the egg with this expressionless human silhouette, soon to become the new face of anonymous harassment and trolling. Twitter's move might not seem like the biggest news, but it actually happened. Meanwhile, every company on the internet was busy rolling out their April Fool's Day pranks that they'd probably been working on for months. Unfortunately for us, the Gagapalooza fell on a Saturday this year, turning our entire weekend into a long episode of Punk'd. But instead of Ashton Kutcher, a brand pops out of a bush and yells engagement. Among the dozens of companies who put far too much effort into something for who knows what payoff, Lexus made an ad for its fake car technology, Burger King had an ad for Whopper toothpaste, and Lyft showed it really understood what April Fool's pranks are all about when it launched its mono hailing glove, which it actually designed and produced. See, it's funny because they spent time and money on a product that everyone except me has already forgotten about. Even the most tarnished brands can get a lift from a solid, self-effacing April Fool's gag. Russia's foreign ministry made light of current events with this recording on their Facebook page.
To arrange a call from a Russian diplomat to your political opponents, press 1. To use the services of Russian hackers, press 2. To request election interference, press 3, and wait until the next election campaign.
Look, we all like to have a bit of fun, but let's be honest. April Fool's is just fake news. Between stories about Jared Kushner flying to Iraq and hamburger toothpaste, it's just too difficult for today's news consumer to know what to believe. But for fans of fun pranks, there's a silver lining. There used to only be one day a year that eroded the public's trust in the media. Now, that fun gets to happen every day, forever. Hooray!
That's Vice News Tonight for Monday, April 3rd.